I have the honor of introducing our second speaker of the evening, Thomas MacEntee. He was born in New York, attended George Washington University in Washington, D.C. as a self-professed baby boomer who endeavors to never end learning.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, David. I appreciate it. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
Good, good.
For myself.
Yeah, so I am really stoked about this presentation tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is that okay?
You go ahead. I'll let you jump right in.
I think I'm good to go. And you should be seeing my screen, correct, Dave?
It's starting up and getting ready for the 1950 census. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and stay on camera. This is your proof that my mother was correct. She always said that I had a face made for radio and a voice made for print. So I'm also going to ask everyone to mute themselves if you're not participating and asking questions right now. I will take questions at the end of the presentation, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I'm really, like I said, stoked about being part of this event. Getting ready for the 1950 US Census. I have created a series of about 6 different webinars right now in preparation for the release of the 1950 census images. You should know that they will be released on Friday, April 1st, 2022. So the clock is ticking, less than a year. And we are hopeful that they will be released on time. And that's what I'm going to go over here. A little bit more about me. I'm from Chicago, but right now I am in Palm Springs, California, where it's about 97 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm here for the month of April. But as David said, I've been doing this, oh my gosh, I'm going on 45 years now. I started doing genealogy at age 14. It was 1977. The miniseries Roots came on television, and I was hooked as a kid. I was also lucky enough to have my great-grandparents in my life, very influential, helped raise me, and I could ask them questions about my family history. I found out that I was New York Dutch, 1641 in Schenectady. Also, my English side on my mother's side were the Crandalls and the Austin family in Rhode Island, 1628. My latest passion has been researching my French Huguenot ancestors, 1675 in New Paltz, New York, Ulster County. In fact, my 9th great-grandfather's stone house is still standing, built in 1699. And I'm just blown away, still blown away by that. So I have long roots, mostly on the East Coast, and I've been very passionate about genealogy. In 2008, I was laid off from the information technology field, and that's when I decided to pursue genealogy as a business professionally. I have taken the Boston University online class of genealogy research. There's a certificate program. If you're not familiar with it, just go ahead and search for Boston University genealogy. And it was a 15-week course, but man, oh man, it was 30 hours of homework a week. It was like master degree level work. So I've been plugging away at this for a while. And right now, my focus is on the 1950 US Census. What can you do to get ready for the 1950 census? What will the images look like? How will the images be released, etc.? So right now, there it is. I'm gonna go ahead and admit that person. This is what the form is gonna look like. It's unclear to me whether this will be microfilmed in color or black and white. I have a feeling it will be black and white. A few differences I will point out with the form. If you were part of the 1940 US Census rollout in 2012, you know that it looked more like the standard 1930 census form, 1920, 1910. This is a little bit different. The 1940 form had 40 lines. This will have 30 lines. The 1940 form had 2 people selected at random, if you remember this, for supplemental questions. Well, the nice thing is, in the 1950 census, there were 6 people selected for random questions. So that's a bigger proportion. The questions are amazing, and we'll go over those as well. So that's the date. This is the date you should put on your calendar. It will be 12:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I believe. And you can actually get prepared now. There are certain things that you can do. You can actually start finding those addresses for your ancestors, or even yourself. If you remember where you were in April 1st, 1950, to go ahead and find the enumeration district and then be ready to go through the images. I will tell you right now, just like 1940, the images are not indexed ahead of time. Take a little bit of soda here because I'm dry mouth. So this means that you're going to have to know the enumeration district for the person that you're looking for, and you're going to have to browse those images manually. That's what we had to do back in 2012 when the 1940 census was released. So what are we going to learn from the 1950 US Census, and why is this so important? Keep in mind that this is the census that is after World War II, which was a big game changer for society in the United States. Keep in mind, in 1947, there was a recession in the US economy. Most of the GIs were coming back. They were displacing the women that had taken over many of the labor jobs, Rosie the Riveter, munitions, anything at home. And so there were a lot of changes between 1946 and 1950. And that is reflected in the questions that they start to ask in the 1950 census. Also, it's the growth of suburbia, Levittown, the first suburban community on Long Island, 1947. There was a housing shortage in 1947, 1948, with everyone coming back from the war. It was part of the GI Bill to help vets get housing. So this is really, really important. Unfortunately, I will not be in the 1950 census. And I hate to say it, I'm not in the 1960 either. I was born in 62. These are the questions that are asked on the 1950 US Census. Also, I will point out, this is the last decennial census, meaning every 10 years, where they ask any type of citizenship question. Going forward, they did ask about citizenship, but it was only on the community survey. It was only on supplemental questions. It was not everyone that was enumerated. So what are we going to find out here? You're going to have the name of the street, avenue, or road where the household is located, the home or apartment number, the serial number of the dwelling unit. This question is important. Is the house on a farm or a ranch? Keep in mind that the US society was moving from an agrarian society more towards a suburban city society. How did this happen? World War II. A lot of the jobs were located in the cities. I know from Chicago, a lot of people in Wisconsin and Illinois wound up going to Southern California, McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, all of these places for the war effort. That's where the jobs were. If you're coming out of the Great Depression, you went where the jobs were. So people were moving more towards cities and away from farms and ranches. They wanted your name, of course, your relationship to the head of household. They did ask the race question and basically whether you were white or colored. The sex, how old were you on your last birthday? That is the only way we're going to be able to back engineer a birth date for the person. They did not ask, like the 1900 census, what year you were born in or what month you were born in. They wanted to know your marital status. What state or country were you born in? So again, this relates to citizenship. If foreign born, is the person naturalized? We've seen this many times on censuses. Also, what was this person doing in terms of work for the previous week. Again, this was all related to the economy. I, I hate to say it over and over again, but people don't realize how bad the recession was in 1947. So they're asking things: are you keeping house? Are you working? Are you working full time? Also, what else is there? If you said no, if you didn't work, so it's very similar to what was asked for 1940, because they were just coming out of the Great Depression as well. How many hours did you work in the last week? What kind of work do you do? They wanted to know what type of work were people doing, and what kind of business or industry was the person in. Also, the class of the worker. That came down to whether you were doing government work, whether you were doing private sector work, etc. So what do you need to know about this data? All of these questions, they're available on the US Census website. You go to census.gov, G-O-V, and you can actually go to the history of the census and look up the questions, the forms, and actually how the rollout for the census was in 1950. So right now, there's not a lot of information circulating about how we are going to access these images. I will tell you what happened in 1940, because I was involved with the rollout. On April 2nd, 2012, and it was not April 1st, because April 1st was a Sunday. On that Monday, many of the major vendors like Ancestry, MyHeritage, Find My Past, they showed up with equipment like hard drives, major hard drives that could hold tons of information. And they had to download these images from NARA. It's going to be different this time. I've already confirmed that the images are going to be in the cloud. If you don't know what that means, well, let me tell you this: Family Search and Ancestry, they no longer put their data on their own servers. They actually are using Amazon Web Servers. Many businesses do this, and it's a smart way to do it, to be honest. So they're up in the cloud. So there's no downloading, there's no delay. We are anticipating that at 12:01 Eastern, boom, you'll have access to those images on Ancestry, on Find My Past, on various different platforms that are working with NARA. So also, there are plans to do the indexing. If you remember, in 2012, the 1940 census took 123 days to index. Now, Ancestry, they used their paid indexers, their usual indexers. Family Search organized over 100,000 volunteers. I was one of them. I indexed a lot of Alaska in 2012. So there will be opportunities for you to index records. I have asked Family Search to do something a little bit different than they did in 2012. In 2012, you could select the state that you were indexing, but you couldn't select the county or even drill down to a certain enumeration district. I told them, I said, you know, it is so important for people to be able to select an enumeration district that they want to index. And this is the reason why. I grew up in a very small county in upstate New York, the poorest county. It was right 90 miles north of New York City. But you know what? I know every person in that county. I know those old family names. So I think that the indexing would go, it would progress better if people were able to select down to that level. So not sure whether that's going to work or not. So as I said again, when these are released, there's no name index. You will not be able to search by name. You will need to know where your ancestor or you were in 1950 as of April 1st, and also basically what enumeration district you were in when you were enumerated. And as I said just now, we had 150,000 volunteers in 2012. I imagine that we're going to have even more than that. While they estimate for the 1950 census that it's going to take 180 days, I really think it's going to come in way under that. I have to laugh because during the pandemic, if you remember last March, a lot of us started the lockdown, and I said to myself, wouldn't it be great if we had the 1950 census ready and available to index? We're all sitting at home. It would have been a great opportunity. The reason is there is a law that Congress passed in the 1950s that places a 72-year hold on census information. So if you think of it, the census day was April 1st, 1950. That is why our release date is April 1st, 2022. That law is still in effect. And at that time, keep in mind, 72 was a reasonable expectation as to life expectancy. I have to laugh because in April of 2012, Easter, I was sitting with my father-in-law, who is now 90 years old, and I showed him where he was in Chicago on the 1940 census. And he said, wow, and he loved it. He saw the apartment building he lived in, all the kids that he played with, all the other Greek families. But he said, you know, they told us that no one would ever see this information. And then you fast forward and actually, you know, there we are 72 years later and we're accessing it. So as I said before, it is going to be your duty to start to find out where people lived as of April 1st, 1950. Some of the resources that you're going to use, think about city directories, telephone directories. You might want to look at old letters, return addresses. And you know what I used? My mother had a 1950, my grandmother had a 1950 Christmas card list of everyone she sent cards to. And it was sweet. And it is still sweet because I've taken those names and those addresses and I've started to build a spreadsheet. And I said, these are the people that I want to try and locate. So that's what my recommendation is. In terms of supplemental schedule, so we're talking about population. That is usually when you say census, that's what genealogists think of. It's basically the enumeration. It's called the population schedule. There was a housing schedule. There was an agricultural schedule, but those are not part of the images that are going to be released, and they're not going to be indexed. So we are focusing only on the basic population schedule. Also, as I said before, it's already been digitized. These images for 1950 have been microfilmed, and we're just waiting for them to flip the switch. It will not be before April 1st, 2022. I can guarantee that to you. How was the 1950 US Census different? And I think that's important how we look at the difference between 1940 and 1930. Number one, Americans living abroad were enumerated. Now, if you look at the constitutional mandate in Article 3 of the US Constitution, it says it's an enumeration of all residents. Doesn't say citizens, it's all residents. So this is a bit of an aberration outside the parameters of what the constitutional mandate is. Well, to be honest, when you look at it, the progression of the census is a total aberration. I mean, if you remember the early census, it was the head of household and then check marks for people in certain age groups. That's not what the Constitution says. And then we're asking more and more questions. We're asking, you know, are you foreign born? Where do you work? Who is, you know, what do you do for a living? And again, it's been expanded. The reason is the US government is using this more for determining budgets and all of these other statistical needs in terms of the state of the economy, the state of society. So, but I do want to point out that this is really, it's a little bit out of the purview of what, here we are, we're counting people that are living abroad. Yes, they may have a permanent residence in the US, but they are outside of the US. And we're talking about people, armed forces. Remember, Germany and Japan, a lot of GIs were stationed there after World War II. Ship crews, merchant marines, US government employees, anyone involved with the military, anyone with the US State Department would have been included here. Also, this is the first time that a non-military computer, the UNIVAC 1, would be used to tabulate census data. We're talking old vacuum tube computers that would take up a whole room. And I have to laugh because I'm going to show you something right here on the camera. This is my latest toy. This is a 2 terabyte solid state drive. It cost me about $200 on Amazon. I can store my whole genealogy research on this. And I will tell you that this data would have taken a whole room in 1950 with a UNIVAC computer. That's how many servers and technology you would need to replicate this amount of data, to store that amount of data. In terms of numbers, 1940, we had 135 million residents. Now we have 150 million residents in 45 million homes. That's what the numbers are. Oh, I hate to bring this up. Are you ready? You got your handkerchiefs ready? So there were special infant cards that were completed. Enumerators would hand them out if they knew that a baby was born during January, February, or March of 1950. Why was this done? Well, basically, they were trying to see how good the state level birth registrations were. There were certain states that were not really complying with even their own state laws. So what they would do is, if there was a baby there born between January, February, and March, the enumerator would fill it out. They'd hand it in the Census Bureau. Census Bureau would follow up with the parents, and they would also make sure that the records were on the state level. If they were not on the state level, they would then ask the parents to file a birth registration. Well, guess what? These cards were never microfilmed. They were actually destroyed after the statistics were gathered. And so I hate to disappoint you, because the questions asked on these forms were amazing. They would ask the mother's parents' names, the ethnicity, how many children she had, how many were living, and how many had been born. It was a wealth of information. But then I tell myself, Thomas, the census was not created for genealogists. It was actually created for other purposes. We just benefit from it as genealogists. And I think that's the important part to keep in mind. Yes, this is a big loss. It would have been perfect, almost perfect, if we had access to these images, but we're not going to have them. This was the same as in 1940. They call them transients. And I think that transients is sort of a misnomer. It has a negative connotation. In 1940, keep in mind, people were coming out of the Great Depression. They were living in campsites. They were living in rail cars. They were living in single room occupancy hotels, having lost their homes. So in 1950, they assigned a specific day, April 11th, to go out and enumerate these people. The other thing you will find, and I urge you to use historical newspapers to look for these ads. The Census Bureau would run ads with a coupon that you could clip out. If you had been missed, if you had not been enumerated, and of course the day was April 1st, that was the census day. So by June and July, you will start to see these ads in newspapers, and people could clip the coupon, send it in the Census Bureau, and then they would be contacted to actually add that information. So what can you do to prepare for the 1950 US Census data? And I'm going to actually walk you through what you can actually do. So I have a spreadsheet that I've started. If you're not a spreadsheet person, you could do it on a piece of paper, do it in Word, whatever. But I would make a list of those people that you're looking for in the 1950 census. That would be one column. And then basically you need to identify an address for that person. You're not going to make any headway, and you're going to have to wait for indexing, and that could be up to 6 months. So find that 1950 April 1st address. I would use newspapers, any correspondence, any letters, return addresses, Christmas card lists, yearbooks. I know my mother's yearbook in 1961, it listed her home address for all the seniors. So go ahead and look at those high school yearbooks. City directories. Keep in mind, city directories in 1950 were actually declining, and telephone directories were becoming more popular. After World War II, more people could afford their own telephone. So a telephone directory is going to have their address. And also, if you have found an old address book of your grandparents or great-grandparents, that would be key. I'm going to show you the Steve Morse one-step site. This is what a lot of us use for the 1940 census release. And he has a way to put in an address and then triangulate is the best term for it, the enumeration district. You want to know what enumeration district that person lived in. That is your key to the kingdom. Now, it could be anywhere from 5 images to as many as 50 or 100 images, depending on the population. Also, you cannot rely upon the 1940 US Census enumeration district for 1950. Steve Morse has a converter. If you do know where your ancestor lived in 1940 and you're certain that they lived there in 1950, he has a conversion mechanism. It's very easy, but you cannot assume that. And keep in mind, a lot of changes between 1940 and 1950, as I said before, moving from an agrarian society to a more of an urban suburban society. So of course, there's a lot of migration, and enumeration districts are going to change. This is the other thing. I just taught this morning for a group. It's for legacy. It's street name changes. So what do I mean by that? Well, streets did change their names. Cities did reconfigure the numbering grid. Not so much in 1950, but with suburbia, these developments had new street names, and also it could be possible that the street that your family was on in 1940 could have changed the name and even the street number by 1950. I only do this when I run into, I guess I'll call it a speed bump or a brick wall. If I can't find that person on 1950 census, then you should start asking yourself, or I'll ask myself, oh, maybe I have the street name wrong. Maybe I have the address wrong. Maybe it changed between 1940 and 1950. So as I said before, my method is a spreadsheet. I think it's an easy way to do. It's easy to print out, one column with the name, a second column with the address. I would do a date column because it's not always going to be April 1st. And then the 4th column is the key. It's that enumeration district that you're going to look up. And you use that info once it's released on April 1st, 2022. If you know your enumeration district, you can go right to that set of images and start browsing. This reminds me when I got started in 1977. This is before the IBM PC. I was using microfilm. The images were not indexed. We were using Soundex, and that's what we had to do. It's sort of like we're going back to old school. Oh, I have to tell you, did you know that you can actually get your 1950 US Census data now? You can actually get your 2010 census data if you really want to. Very few people know about this. The Census Bureau has an age search service, and I'm going to go to the link out here and show it to you. There are some parameters involved here. Let me go ahead and close this other image up here. Great. Now, I don't know what the status of the service is during the COVID pandemic. They may be backed up, but basically, you can get a transcript of the census from 1910 to 2010. It's going to cost you money. It is not going to be the full census page, I will tell you, because of privacy concerns. Let's say that you wanted the 1970 census. So I would be there as a 7-year-old boy in Liberty, New York, in Sullivan County. If I asked for my own information, guess what? I'm not going to get the form with everyone else listed, with my mother and my brother listed. I'm just going to get a transcript, an official document with the data. Also, it has to be you requesting your own information, or it has to be you as the legal representative of someone to ask for that information. So there is a fee. Currently, the fee is $65 US for one person. Check or money order, no credit cards. If you know this, if you've ever tried to pay your taxes with a credit card online, think about it. The government doesn't want to pay that processing fee. So that's part of it. Also, you have to have an address for that person that you want the transcript for. And it would be in your best interest to go ahead and look for the enumeration district ahead of time. It's going to help the census people find the information that you need. Also, I'm going to move this toolbar here. Thank you. The processing time, the last time I checked, was 3 to 4 weeks. You could pay $20 for extra expediting. I think it comes down to 1 week. But again, everything that I'm quoting here is pre-COVID. I'm not certain what the process is now. You'll probably have to email them, see what the wait time is. I'm sure that there is a backlog. And then finally, and I actually will go through the Steve Morse site in a minute, but I want you to know that Ancestry has something that they call the 1950 Census Substitute. Now, what is this all about? Well, basically what they've done is, let's see, can we go there? They have taken all of their city directory listings for 1950. And basically, they have gone ahead and they've created a form where you can actually search for someone. My recommendation is you never want to say match terms exactly. I'm going to see if I can find my grandfather, and he lived in Sullivan County, New York, like that. And it should pull it from city directories if it's available. Oh, that's okay. That's 1938. That's not him. That's not him. That's not him. So I'd have to go through all of this, to be honest. And again, keep in mind what I said. By 1950, telephone directories were more predominant than city directories. A lot of cities gave up starting in World War II on doing these city directories because more and more people had telephones. Let me go ahead and show you, before we get to Q&A, I do want to show you the Steve Morse one-step site. And let me go ahead and move my toolbar here. It's at stevemorse.org. If you don't know Steve Morse, he is a god as far as I'm concerned. This is a man that invented the Intel 8087 chip back in the 80s and 90s, and then retired, and he has dedicated the rest of his life to genealogy, specifically Jewish genealogy, but he's created all of these tools. So it's in the handout. I would urge you to go to the article Getting Ready for the 1950 US Census. There's also a tutorial quiz, but basically I'm using this, the Unified 1880 to 1950 Census Enumeration District Finder. You can pick which one you want, set it to 1950, and this is how it works. I'm going to use my address in Chicago. I'm going to go ahead and change this to Illinois. Change it to Crook County. I know I said Crook County. And then I'm going to go ahead and say Chicago. All right, and this is where you need to start to pay attention. You put in the house number. I am at 1416. Now the name of my street is West Carmen, Carmen, like Carmen Miranda. But the thing is, the way the streets work, it's the name or the number and then the directional. It doesn't say W Carmen. By the way, look what came up. All of these enumeration districts for the city of Chicago. So your goal basically is you're going to try and whittle this down to one enumeration district. I'm going to go ahead here and start to scroll through and look for Carmen, as in Carmen. And please work with me. Let's see. And there it is, Carmen. And it says Carmen Avenue West. It is a west street that goes from basically Lake Michigan all the way out 7 miles to where O'Hare Airport is. Okay, so now I'm down to roughly about 30 enumeration districts. This is now where you need to pay attention. You need to determine the cross streets and the back streets. What is a back street? Well, Carmen goes this way. So a back street would be the parallel streets, Winona and Winnemac, and I'll show you in a minute. Cross streets would be the perpendicular streets. In this case, it would be Clark and Glenwood. Luckily, what has happened is Steve Morse has put in a link to Google Maps. It takes the address that you entered and it shows you on a Google map. So while that is processing, I'll take some more soda here. And it shows you the map. It actually, if you're lucky, it'll show you the street view and I should be able to see my building very soon, maybe not. Okay, so look at this. I'm right here in Chicago. These are my back streets, Winona and Carmen. Winona and Winnemac. Now you may think, oh, what is this? This is actually an alley. Chicago is known for their alleys. An alley is where all your services are, your garbage disposal. Believe it or not, and this is my house right here, believe it or not, there are no electrical wires on the streets in Chicago. There are no telephone wires, cable wires, and they're not sunk in the ground. They're in the back in the alley. So this is important. So we have Winona, we have Winnemac, we have Glenwood, and we have Clark. So that's how we're going to narrow this down. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to close this, come back to the ED Finder, and it's going to say cross or back street. Well, I tend to go with the major street, and I'm going to go with Clark. Notice the table only shows streets that will work with the address. You don't have to go through every street in the city. I'm going to say Clark. Oh, wow, we're down to 3 enumeration districts. Now I'm going to start to do the back streets. Remember, Winona and Winnemac. Or is it Winnemac? No, Winona and Winnemac. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe I'll pick, or I can pick Glenwood. Glenwood is the other perpendicular street. And Viola, there it is. I have my enumeration district. I'm good to go. I can put this in. Right now, this will not get me anywhere. But if you were to click this as of April 1st, 2022, you will be able to select whether you want the family search images, the ancestry images, the MyHeritage images, and that's the way it worked for the 1940. So this is what I'm telling you. You can come to this tool right now and start putting in and determining based on the address, and if you're certain, what the enumeration district is. So it's really a great resource to do that. Let's go, and there we are. We're at the end of our presentation. I do want you to feel comfortable emailing me and also asking questions at the end of this presentation, which is where we're at. The thing is, you can always email me at highdefgen@gmail.com. Give me about 48 hours to get back to you. Keep in mind that it usually takes, I usually get 300 or 400 emails a day. So I'm always running triage on these emails. And I'm going to stop my share. And Dave or whoever's hosting, what did you think about that?
Thank you so much,
Oh, hey,
Thomas. This
Leslie.
was
Hey, how
hi,
are you?
Thomas. Hi, great
Hey,
to see you.
good.
This was
Same
just
here.
fantastic.
Yeah, what'd you think of the presentation?
What I loved about it was it wasn't just about like how we're going to get ready for the census and it's what we're going to find. It was how we can
Yeah,
help. You know, it was how we can help actually contribute to it, making it more accessible and more
exactly.
usable.
And also,
Um,
I tried to put it in context of history. I think the thing is when you work in the census and you don't know the history as to why they're asking certain questions, then you really are losing quite a bit about that. I mean, I can't tell you how important the census is in a post-World War II United States.
People that
Uh,
are alive still. So I'm excited to find my
yeah,
parents and all my relatives. So thank
yeah,
you. We
yeah,
do
you're
have a
welcome.
couple of questions from the
Great,
chat.
great.
The first one, I think that you may have covered this, but basically Tara is wondering what an enumeration district is and how you would go about finding that.
Well, the thing is, the best way is to go through the Steve Morse site. I mean, there were maps. Basically, this is what happens. And, you know, I have a confession. My husband works for the US Census. He set up all the 2020 census offices in the Midwest. So I have an inside angle. And the thing is, right now, they're already working on the 2030 census. I will tell you that right now. They're starting to map out enumeration districts. So they work with their cartographers. And the thing is, you want to make sure that they're relatively even in terms of population. You look at boundaries like state lines, county lines. You will never have an enumeration district that crosses a county line. And then you're going to look at like railways and rivers and everything like that. So that's a whole process. So what Steve Morse and his group has done, they already have the images of the 1950 enumeration district maps. What they had to do is they first had to check for any street name changes. Then they had to create these lookup tables. You remember, Leslie, how I went in with an address and I did cross streets and back streets. That all had to be keyed in manually. I mean, Steve Morse and his group, I think they started this 8 years ago, already getting ready for the 1950 census release. So that's how the enumeration districts are determined. That's what I know. The best thing is to go to the US Census site at census.gov, click the history, and then go to 1950. And I believe there's a very large PDF, probably about 30 or 40 pages, that talks about how the preparation process was for the 1950 census. Good question.
I got a
Thank you,
question.
Tara. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, someone else was speaking, so
I got
Oh yeah,
go ahead.
I got a quick question on this enumeration district.
Sure.
Is that a city block? I mean, what's
It's not necessary. It could be several city blocks. In fact, in Manhattan in 1940, my great grandparents lived in a huge apartment building. That whole complex took up 2 enumeration districts. So you really can't say that it's just going to be one city block.
all right.
Yeah.
all right, and we have another question from Lori, and I think that this has to do with, I think, like the overseas, people who live overseas.
Yes. Yes.
And the question is, how do they know residents other than military are found?
Well, I'm not sure of that. I don't know if it was a process. I doubt that enumerator went over to Germany or Japan. I think it was more self-reporting. I also think it was based on government records. So there probably was a PR campaign saying, if you have family that lives overseas, make sure they contact. In 1940, there was a big marketing campaign. And you know why, Leslie? Because a lot of people were hesitant to answer some of the questions. 1940 was the first census that asked how much money you made. People were concerned privacy-wise that their neighbors would know, you know, how much money they made, etc. So starting with 1940, you'll see more and more marketing, newspaper ads. Remember the coupon in the 1950 newspapers for people that were missed. So I think that's how they handled it, but it was based on self-reporting. I can't see that they would send an enumerator over to Germany or Japan or a ship, a merchant marine ship. Does that make sense?
So yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Lori.
Yeah.
Let's see. Another question from Tara. I find that my family who has worked on our genealogy is so tight-lipped and does not share what they have found. Is this common for people to have all of the work that has already been done hidden and not shared? Thank you so much for sharing this awesome information. So helpful.
Yeah, it is. I have to say that the idea of privacy is very different than what it is today. Because I actually lecture on privacy. And one of the things is I know all my millennial and Gen X friends, they don't, and I don't want to say they don't care about privacy, but they will give up some privacy if it gives them a benefit, like Google Drive, like using an app or a convenience or a time saver. Whereas my mother's generation, she was born in 1941, she always said, when the minute you stepped out of your house, your neighbors were watching. My mother always said to me, do you know what would the neighbors say? Of course, I didn't care as a kid, but the thing is, it was important to that generation. I mean, I grew up where if you were in the hospital, it was listed in the paper every week. I mean, the whole idea of privacy was very different. And so that's where it might be coming from. People that grew up with that sense of privacy versus the way that most of us feel today. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I just had a
Sure.
question. Just thinking about how the census went down last year, like with COVID and working for the
Yes.
library and
Yeah.
how they really depended on us to help,
Right.
let people do the census online. What
Yeah.
was do you know when did they first start sending like the census like documents to you? Like when was that? When was it not someone
For the
just knocking on the door of
2020.
your house?
For the
Okay.
2020. Well, the 2020, the goal was pre-COVID. I know that the goal was to have 94% of people completed online. And that means through your own computer or going to a public library or a place where you had access to doing that. And to me, I thought that was great foresight, given what happened. The thing is, people do not know that enumerators work year round. There's something called the community survey. It's 0.3% of the population, and it is an expanded questionnaire. And they're asking things like how many bedrooms you have, how many toilets you have, etc. And you will receive that in the mail, and then someone will usually follow up. So I do know for a fact that they use fewer enumerators in 2020 than in 2010. Keep in mind, 2010, most people didn't have broadband yet. It was very different in terms of internet access. But the downside with 2020 is, and the assumption that people would do it online, is you have the underserved communities, people of color, poor communities that didn't have access to internet. And the fear is, to be honest, that the 2020 census is not going to be accurate. So what happens? Well, did you know that there was an 1892 federal census for New York because they felt that they were undercounted in the 1890 census? So I don't know. I don't know that the government is going to spend money. I would love to see them do a 2025 census. I would. I mean, I think that it would be great, but it costs them almost $1 billion to do the 2020 census. I just don't think that that's going to happen. Yeah. Any
All
other
right.
questions?
I don't see any more questions coming
Okay.
through in the
Well,
chat.
people can always email me, Leslie, and I don't want them to be shy. Don't think that you're bothering me. I would love it because when I get questions, it helps me develop my lecture, refine my lecture, gives me new ideas for other lectures. So I encourage you to email me with your questions.
You hear that? Everyone email Tom with your question. Thomas with your questions. He's happy to help.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so
yeah.
much.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed this. I really enjoyed it. So I really did. So, okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a good
All
night,
right.
Thomas. Thank you.
Bye-bye.